Hello, folks, and welcome to another episode of Rock the Cradle. We are very lucky to have with us Professor Mohammed Marandi. He is the professor of English Literature and Orientalism at the University of Tehran and right in the thick of things. Welcome, Mohammed. Thank you for being with us again.
Thank you very much for having me. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you. 300 people were killed in Lebanon yesterday and well over 1,000 injured in the worst carpet bombing Beirut has ever seen, and in the south of Lebanon and the Bekaa. French, Pakistani, Spanish governments have condemned these actions in strong terms. U.S. President Trump denies that his promised ceasefire included Lebanon. Pakistanis and Iranians say otherwise. It did. The Strait of Hormuz in just a few hours, opened and closed faster than Trump can spell check one of his social media posts. Have Iranians fallen for the same negotiations ruse again? Or did Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu call Trump's bluff and force him to retreat a few steps?
No, Iran was not deceived. In fact, that is basically a myth when, when they say that Iran was deceived before the 12-day war or deceived before this war. None of these were deception, or at least they were deception, but Iran wasn't deceived. Before the 12-day war, Iran was negotiating with the United States, and it was negotiating indirectly. And it did not have any trust in the Americans. The Americans, immediately after the first round, when they accepted nuclear enrichment, they changed their position and they kept moving the goalposts. And the Iranians knew that they were preparing for war with the Israelis. They did not know when or under what circumstances. But the Iranians went through the negotiating process because they wanted to keep the country united. They wanted to keep as many people on board, both at home and abroad, so that the West, with their powerful media apparatus and their Arabic media allies in Qatar and in Saudi Arabia and in the Emirates and their Persian media empire, which they have hundreds of Persian media language outlets that are funded with billions of dollars a year. They have troll farms. Thousands of people in just one single troll farm are working. So the Iranians have to make sure that the West, the United States, the Israeli regime, and their regional proxies are unable to create divisions, whether among Iranians or among Iranian supporters, or to succeed in antagonizing Iran across the international community. If people across the world had seen Iran refuse to negotiate at all, and the war had started, then many would have blamed Iran. They would have said, well, if you had negotiated, this wouldn't have happened. And they would have pushed the same narrative in Iran. Why were so many commanders martyred? Because they have very good technology. They use technology, and they were able to strike targets and have relative success on day one, just like they did in the war last month, where we knew they were going to attack. In fact, on both occasions, I told people that I believe that they're going to attack on the last war, this war, on the night before. I said I think they're going to attack tonight. And I wasn't the only person saying this. And during that war, I also felt that during those days, it was going to happen. In fact, people from abroad felt that way, and they informed me, and people inside Iran also knew. So there was this is a big myth that I often see online, but I don't bother to challenge it because it's just it's not a useful argument. But since you've brought this up, I think I have to clarify this for people. So if during this war, again, right before this war, if we had not negotiated and the United States had carried out its assault, then a lot of people would have said, well, if only Iran had tried, and they would have created the same narrative inside Iran. So I think the Iranians did the right thing, but they, in order to make sure the Americans did not have the upper hand at the negotiating table, that they did not feel that they'd forced Iran to the negotiating table, they negotiated indirectly and in a country or mediated by a country that the Americans did not want to have as to act as mediators. So act as the middlemen, their politicians or their diplomats. So that sort of balanced the playing field, and it also convinced Iranians, those who need convincing, and people across the world, those who need convincing. Excuse me. Those who need convincing that Iran tried thing. This time round, there's much talk of Trump wanting an off-ramp. Do I know that he wants an off-ramp? No. I don't know what goes on in the head of this psychopath. But if indeed, as some analysts who are very respected and who I listen to and respect, if they are correct, because they say that he is seeking an off-ramp, then a ceasefire can provide him with an off-ramp. If he is not sincere about a ceasefire and he is not really seeking an off-ramp and he's only buying time, well, then the Iranians will be preparing themselves as well for the continuation of war, but also he will be exposed as being deceitful. And that is also useful to keep people united and keep Iran's supporters across the world, which are now very many, and the resistance, the axis of resistance, keeping them together. And so, for example, yesterday when they bombed Lebanon, they exposed themselves as dishonest. Now, 300 people were martyred from all over the country. Many of the people who were killed were not even supporters of the resistance, I would assume, because of the differing neighborhoods that were bombed. Why didn't Iran immediately retaliate? Because it outrages Iranians. If you saw the images on the streets last night across the country, the crowds were probably unprecedented last night across the country. And people were calling for Iran to strike. But this is also, I don't like to use this terminology, but this is also a complicated war. It's like chess. The moves have to be taken carefully. Iran needs to expose the United States as much as possible and the Israeli regime. And then when the time comes, Iran will continue punishing the Israeli regime. There's no shortage of time on that. But Iran wants to show that we are sincere. We, the axis of resistance, are sincere in trying to establish a ceasefire. And the United States is not. And if the United States is, based on what you were saying, that maybe Trump wanted this, but the Israelis are undermining it, we want the world to see, and Americans to see, that the Israeli regime is undermining any chance for peace. And the best example is that Tucker Carlson had a program last night where my friend Alistair Crook was also on the show. I haven't watched it. I watched bits and pieces where, but the point was that Tucker Carlson was making the argument that we believe needs to be made. So if Iran had immediately attacked, then that whole debate would have been sidelined. And what Tucker Carlson and others have been saying all day yesterday would have been useless, or would have been very much less effective. But ultimately, the Iranians and the resistance are going to strike the Israeli regime. This is not over. But we cannot act in an emotional manner. It pains us. I know I have friends in Lebanon. I've lived in Lebanon, and family of friends were murdered. Friends of friends were murdered, and the death and destruction was widespread and outrageous. But we cannot be emotional. Just like sometimes when the Israeli regime struck the school and killed 168 little girls, or when they murdered Ayatollah Khamenei, our response was not emotional. We had to be calculated. We had to strike in accordance with the broader plan. Or, for example, when sometimes when the Israelis or the Israeli regime or the Americans would bomb some important bridge, people would immediately say, carry out some decisive missile strike. But the military planners, they have to refrain from being emotional and carrying out something that they, based on their military calculations, is not useful. So I think the Iranians did the right thing. I think that so, and I don't think anyone here, at least not that I know, I don't think many people here would accuse me of being a liberal or someone who is willing to appease the Americans. I believe that we have to carry on with this fight, and we have to make sacrifices. I have a bounty on my head, and I will continue to work as usual and use the internet, which helps make me a target. So it's not that I'm fearful, and it's not that I am afraid of the war continuing, or I'm afraid of my personal safety, but I think that all the things that we do in order to win this war have to be very carefully calculated and carried out without being emotional.
You make a very, very important point. It's one we often debate on the Cradles podcasts. For those who think that Iran is plotting or naive, the point is the Americans have dominated the narratives, the global narratives for so long that they can do whatever they want. They can announce they're going to take Greenland, they're going to, Canada. Whereas the Iranians have had to set the stage carefully so that domestic public opinion and global public opinion understands their position. You're a professor of Orientalism, and so words have a great deal of nuance for you and the way we use words. I would reckon that you and I have never seen such a flip in the script of how people are talking about this conflict. Not only because the US and Israel were the initial aggressors, they could have played it smart and gone and sunk the Iranians in terms of the narrative, but that didn't happen. And some of it is maybe due to the extraordinary Iranian videos mocking the Americans and mocking their enemies. But tell me, this isn't, for years, Mohammed, you've been talking about these things, and you've almost been a one-man show talking about these things. Today, it's everywhere. Today, American public opinion is oftentimes with the Iranians. What do you make of this, and what do you think was the trigger? Do you think it started with Gaza, or something related to this war?
I think it did begin with Gaza, and it grew when Hezbollah entered the battlefield, and it grew even further when Yemen entered the battlefield. When the Saudi regime and the Emiratis were carrying out their 7-year genocidal war against Yemen, everyone was with them. all the Arabic media supported the genocide. Al Jazeera supported the genocide. Erdogan supported the genocide. I went on Al Jazeera twice soon after the genocidal war began, and I defended Ansarullah and the people of Yemen, and I was banned from Al Jazeera for a long period of time. Just as when the dirty war in Syria began, and I went on their programs a few times, and then I was banned then. So after a couple of while, then they allowed me to, or they invited me again. And but it shows that, how everyone was with the genocide. And the Ansarullah was antagonized across the world. And sadly, they did not have all that much support across the world or the region because of that propaganda, sectarian propaganda, and other forms of propaganda, accusing them of being proxies and so on. And so Al Jazeera, Al Arabiya, Western media, Turkish state-affiliated media, all of them were bombarding Yemen and or attacking Ansarullah. But then when all of these regimes turned out to be, in the eyes of everyone, indifferent, complicit, or looking away, they were seen as looking away during the genocide in Gaza, and it was Ansarullah and Hezbollah that made sacrifices, especially Hezbollah though, but Ansarullah as well. Views changed about them. So the Palestinian people, the resistance in Lebanon, Ansarullah, the views changed. Back then, I think the views on Iran evolved more slowly. Why? And Hezbollah more slowly. And then Ansarullah. And the reason is Syria. And of course, the sectarianism that Qatar and the Saudis and Erdogan and people close to these regimes, they have been promoting for many years, and some of them for many decades. The Saudis, when they were at it first, they began with the Americans in the 1980s to promote sectarianism to prevent the spread of the revolution in support of Saddam Hussein, and in order to defeat the revolution and to preserve their monarchies. And with the support of the West, they promoted this. And it was effective. But in Syria, it became even more effective because they succeeded in convincing many people in the Arab world and in the Muslim world that this was a sectarian fight. And whereas it had nothing to do with sectarianism at all. But since these regimes are in the American camp, I mean, let's not hide with facts. Erdogan is in NATO. Erdogan is transporting oil to the Israeli regime as we speak. Erdogan is a friend of Trump. Trump said, whenever I need him, he's there for me. And the same is true with the rest of them. The rest are worse if they're definitely not any better. So these regimes, they were in the American camp, and they were deeply involved in Operation Timber Sycamore. They were deeply involved in Operation Timber Sycamore. And of course, they had their own interests too. They definitely, Erdogan wanted a piece of Syria or for himself, or he wanted Syria to be in his sphere of influence, but he cooperated with the Israeli regime. And so did these other countries. And by 2013, when, we know that in February 12, 2012, Jake Sullivan told Hillary Clinton that Al-Qaeda is on our side in Syria, and the Defense Intelligence Agency document of 2012 saying that regional countries wanted to create a Salafist entity between Syria and Iraq, and the head of that agency, General Michael Flynn, in an interview said that was U.S. policy. So they were helping both ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and they brought in tens of thousands of foreign fighters. And when that happened, Iran said, we have to intervene, and so did Hezbollah. Why? Not because Assad was an Alawite. Assad was a Ba'athist. Iran has no love for the Ba'athist party. Saddam Hussein, he had his own faction of the Ba'athist party. So it wasn't because of him being an Alawite or his wife was Sunni, but it didn't matter to Iran. What mattered was that the CIA did not get its way in Syria. So Iran entered Syria, and so did Hezbollah. And that, of course, created this huge media propaganda wave, both among these proxy regimes in the region with all their oil and gas wealth and Western regimes. And that succeeded in influencing the way many people thought. Iran was right. Iran was vindicated. Anyone who looks at what happened, and what's happening now, they see that Iran was right. If Syria was not undermined today, the situation in Gaza would have been much different. The situation in Lebanon would have been much different. The situation across the board for the resistance would have been very different. But Erdogan and the Yemeni, the Qatari despot, and the others, they succeeded in helping the Israeli regime. Now, whether their intentions were to help the Israeli regime or they're just useful idiots, in some cases they're more useful idiots than others. In some cases, they're proxies. But in any case, the point is that they were effective in creating this sectarianism. But I think that when after October the 7th began, and then people saw that all these regimes that were accusing Iran and Hezbollah of sectarianism, they were looking away and continued with business as usual, and it was Hezbollah that was making sacrifices. Then I think a lot of that propaganda began to melt away. Not all of it. Yemen, of course, since it wasn't involved in Syria, they became very popular. So they were, because of the propaganda, and the same regimes that were producing propaganda against Iran and Hezbollah, they propagated against them as well, but to less effect. I mean, not to less effect. The shift was much more swift because they were not involved in Syria. So they swiftly became heroes. Then my response is long, but in any case, gradually as time went by, people began to feel different about Hezbollah. But when the ceasefire in Lebanon happened, the sectarian, people affiliated with Qatar and Erdogan and others began ridiculing Hezbollah, and despite all the sacrifices, very ugly. But these people have no decency or no morality. They're not religious. Their religion is fake. They're just like Christian Zionists who have no morality. But in any case, during that war, you saw that Hezbollah had huge support. After the war, these people started ridiculing Hezbollah, but now during the last 40 days, Hezbollah has been so effective that people across the world are amazed. And at the same time, they see where Syria has gone. Unless people want to keep their eyes, except for those who want to keep their eyes closed. I mean, yes, they will always believe what their sectarian overlords tell them. But besides them, and just like in the West, those who are going to be anti-resistance and anti-Muslim or anti-Arab, and whatever Israel does, they'll just close their eyes to reality. Some people will just, they'll keep their eyes closed no matter what happens. They'll still support the Israeli regime, even if it carries out a Holocaust. Just like we saw Trump threaten Iran with the Holocaust, and so many people were completely indifferent. But I think that it's fine. It's a long response, but I'm almost finished. Iran was the shifting mood towards Iran was slower, and that is because Iran was not directly involved, and rightly so. Not is engaged in war, then it will be much more difficult for it to support its allies. So Iran was at that time strengthening the resistance axis in Iraq, in Yemen, in Lebanon, and in Palestine. But during the 12-day war, I think the mood shifted with regards to Iran. Even though those who were sectarian at the end, at the end of the war, they're saying, why didn't Iran continue? Well, Iran didn't continue because Iran knew that if the war continued, the Americans were going to enter the fray. And we had significant shortcomings. The war exposed those. And during these 8-9 months, we saw the Iranians work day and night. And despite the fact that a much greater force has attacked Iran than the Israeli force, the Americans were far more powerful. But we see that the Iranians have been far more successful than even the 12-day war. And that is because Iran used that time wisely to prepare itself for the big war. But the point is that the mood toward Iran changed. And during this war, I think it has gone much further. And during this war, I see people across the world their position has changed during the last 40 days with regards to Ayatollah Khamenei, with regards to the Islamic Republic, with regards to Iran, with regards to Shia, the divisions that the West and their proxies have been trying to create, and with much success in our region and across the world, they have, to a large degree, just melted away. And now people from across the world, friends of mine in Latin America, friends of mine in China and Russia, friends of mine in Africa, say the mood is completely supportive of Iran. Some of the things that I hear from, for example, Chinese friends is extraordinary how they've changed it. Because China, for example, was very much under the influence of Zionist propaganda for a host of reasons. And they didn't have much interest in our region anyway. It's.
Do you mean the
far
Chinese government?
No, I mean the popular mood in China, social media, and so on. So yes, the world has changed dramatically, and I think people are now seeing through the propaganda, and a lot of decent people, they are becoming very popular. There are alternative media outlets, which a couple of years ago were sort of very fringe. Now they get audiences that are much larger at times than mainstream media.
Let's jump right into what's happening right now. I mean, Donald Trump posted again today, in which, maybe we can have this up on the screen, all U.S. ships, aircraft, and military personnel with additional ammunition, weaponry, and anything else that is appropriate and necessary for the lethal prosecution and destruction of an already substantially degraded enemy will remain in place in and around Iran until such time as the real agreement reached is fully complied with. If for any reason it's not, which is highly unlikely, then the shootin' starts, bigger and better and stronger than anyone has ever seen before. And then he basically says, this will not stop until Iran doesn't have nuclear weapons, which it doesn't. And the Strait of Hormuz will be open and safe, which yesterday it was meant to be open before Israel then attacked Lebanon. He's a moody guy. Okay, what is happening here? I mean, one understands that you have to spin to a certain extent to placate your own maybe domestic opposition and your constituents, and maybe your allies. But this is too much almost, because it's fully understood that Donald Trump came on Tuesday night and basically agreed to Iran's 10 terms. And it was mentioned.
No, he didn't agree to the 10 terms. He agreed that it would be the framework for discussion.
Yeah. And that was amplified by the Iranian side, by the Pakistani intermediaries, most importantly, who are you going to listen to, right? Of course, he's, I don't understand it. He's high on the propaganda that, followed in the 24-hour period afterwards, and he's trying to make points. But where are things now? We've heard that, are the talks going to go ahead in Islamabad, for starters, tomorrow?
I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. I haven't spoken with anyone about this issue during the last 24 hours. I haven't spoken with anyone about this issue for the last 24 hours, so I can't say clearly. And obviously, things could change in the hours to come. This is the United States. This is Trump, where he's just all over the place. So I would imagine that even if they're planning not to go, that something could change, or if they're planning to go, that something it could change and they won't go. But I do see things online which I don't respond to, not because I'm indifferent to what people write, but I'm really overburdened. I get lots of requests for interviews, or people ask me questions online. I don't see many of them because there are lots of comments and so on, but sometimes I see them. I mean, if I don't respond, it's not because I'm indifferent, it's because I'm just overburdened. But I do see people say, well, why did you stop? And now the Americans are going to rearm, and well, we are also going to rearm and prepare ourselves. I mean, just like the 12-day war, we felt that we got the upper hand, but now we need time to swiftly deal with our problems. I mean, just one small problem was the launchers. We lost a number of launchers in that war. We had many more than they said, but we were giving martyrs. The martyrs were more important for us than the launchers. And I think, I don't remember the numbers, but maybe 40 people were martyred or so. This time round, I mean, the Israelis are puny compared to the Americans. I mean, even during the 12-day war, the Americans were enabling them to bomb Iran. The real fighting force is the United States. If it was Iran against Israel, Iran would defeat them easily, hands down. But if the Israeli regime was alone. But you had a much stronger force, and the launchers, we see the casualties, the destroyed launchers are much less, even though the firepower is much greater. The ingenuity of the Iranians, and the fact that they went and analyzed, that was just one issue. There are many other issues. For example, the Iranians prepared a plan where they would empty their strategic, their bases, so a lot of places where the Israelis and the Americans bombed were empty, whereas beforehand they were not prepared for this, because if you want to empty a base, you have to have, or empty a building, or you have to know where to take things. How you have to figure out how to run things. So the Iranians were far more prepared. So Iran right now is obviously preparing itself too, but time is not necessarily on the side of the Americans, because every day the shortage of energy increases. It puts pressure on Washington. It puts pressure on the West. The world begins to get more upset with the Zionists because they know that they caused this, and with Americans. The global economy becomes more vulnerable. And also we're moving towards a summer. And American troops that are based in the Persian Gulf region will have to enjoy the humidity and the heat of summer. And their weapon systems will have to, they'll be impacted by the sand and the sandstorms. And staying in this region is very costly for them. This is our neighborhood. And Iran is not a desert like much of the Arabian Peninsula. So Iran doesn't have the same sort of problems that the United States has. So time is not necessarily on their side. So when people say, well, they're going to rearm, of course they're going to rearm. But Iran is not just sitting there doing nothing. This is a complicated, I don't like using it, but this is a very, very complicated game of chess. So you have politics, you have the military, you have to keep society on board, you have to keep international public opinion on your side, you have to isolate your enemy. There are many things that have to be done, and again, they have to be done without taking emotions into consideration. And I think that the Iranians are doing the right thing. I don't know if everything they do is right. They sit down and make decisions, and I'm not privy to those decision-making processes. But I think in general, they are pursuing a course of action where they believe will give them the upper hand in this war. And of course, the Americans are doing the same on the other side. So we shouldn't get emotional about things and expect Iran to react in a certain way or uh, or, uh, or attack in a certain way because it makes us feel good. That feeling good is not necessarily in the long run. It doesn't necessarily serve our interests. For example, I believe that these Arab regimes in the Persian Gulf, they are fully complicit in this war. And they have the blood of many thousands of Iranians on their hands. One could say that, well, Iran should just destroy these regimes and get rid of them. Well, first of all, that would not be moral to just lash out and destroy everything because of their crimes. But also, let's say if you destroy everything, then there's nothing more to destroy. And what you want is deterrence. You want the other side to pause and reflect before destroying your infrastructure, because they know that there would be a response. But if you've already responded, then there's nothing more left to do. I'm just giving this as an example. I mean, what I'm saying is that you have to think both morally, but also you have to think strategically. You have to see what works best in the long run to preserve your forces, to preserve the region, to isolate the enemy, to weaken the enemy. There are many different calculations that you have to take into account.
I want to play a video now by the chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff. I mean, either it was a remarkable revelation that he made about
the U.S. said everyone was firing at us?
No. The U.S.'s Gulf allies, all of them participated in the war. Either he was throwing them under the bus, trying to create the illusion that the Americans had an alliance. You know how they always go into wars, Mohammed, they go with their, what's it called?
Coalition of the Willing.
Coalition of the Willing, exactly. I have heard from, we did see Iran kind of peeling apart the GCC, and that, Qatar and Oman stood alone in its very unusual position. Then Qatar sort of joined, said we would not participate in aggression against Iran. And then you had the Emiratis and the Kuwaitis and Bahrainis gunning for more U.S. aggression against Iran. And then you had the Saudis who kind of, sat on the fence, let's say. I do know from Gulf sources who are very close to influential decision makers there, I have heard this during the hottest phases of the war, that the Americans no longer listen to their hosts. They do exactly what they want on their territory through their airspace, much like they have been doing in Iraq since 2020.
Look, this doesn't matter to us. It's their territory. They're responsible for their territory. In the case of Iraq, the government of Iraq is weak, and the country is broken, but you do see resistance in Iraq work actively against the United States. So if anyone in Iran says, look, the Iraqi government is not opposing the United States, well, it's also not really opposing us either. So we can't blame the Iraqi government. But these regimes allowed this to occur. It's like one of those movies, which I don't know, I haven't watched movies in years, but in one of those movies where one of the antagonists who's helped create that horrific situation suddenly regrets it, but it's too late. Well, it's too late. You created, you've caused the deaths of many thousands of people, and unless you stand up and say, well, the Americans must now leave, then you continue to be complicit. So for us, the excuse that they can't do anything about it is just completely unacceptable.
Let's watch that video now, if we can, full screen.
And I want to thank, as the Secretary did, our Gulf partners who fought alongside each and every one of us every day. From the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain, Qatar, Kuwait, and Jordan, all who joined us together to defend and protect our people and our assets, and who, if required, stand ready to do so again.
Yeah, so that will be a
Well,
statement.
actually, I haven't seen that before. That's actually, well, Trump also said more or less the same. I haven't seen that. If you can send it to me, I'll tweet that.
I'll
Yeah,
do that.
it's clear as day.
It'll make your
Yeah,
case very well every
yeah,
time.
I mean, but the thing is that those who close their eyes and don't want to listen, it doesn't matter what evidence you put in front of them. It's like some people with regards to Syria even now. Even though most people or a lot of people have woken up to reality, a lot of people. But still I meet some people or I speak to some people and they just can't get over they just can't accept the reality. And they're stuck in their old narratives, even though their narratives, when they confront reality, collapse. Or those who in the United States who continue to say the Israeli regime is a democracy or is an asset. You see on CNN and on Fox. It doesn't matter if it's CNN or Fox News. The narrative is not that different. One more bombastic, one more subtle and sophisticated, each for their own audience. But the point is that these people who listen to these pundits, these monsters, these partners in crime, no matter how much you show them the truth, that the dead bodies and the dead kids, it's not going to affect anything. In Beirut, you have Western journalists. In Gaza, they pretended that, well, we don't have access, so we can't verify anything. Whatever. In Beirut, they're all present there. But you always hear that the Israeli regime bombed Hezbollah targets. The Israeli regime bombed Hezbollah strongholds. The journalists in Beirut know they're lying. They know that because they have fixers, they have drivers, they have producers. They know they're lying. And whenever I tell them, why did you write that? Those who I know, they say, oh, well, I didn't write it. I sent my report and the editor, the senior editor, made the changes. It's not in my hands. That's utterly immoral. You're just a tool of empire. You can't say that since someone else made my report ultimately a propaganda piece for the Israeli regime and help and as they carpet bomb the country, I help carpet bomb the truth. That justification is useless. It's unacceptable. So yeah, so some people, they're not going to change no matter what happens, and other people, they won't change because they'll lose their jobs.
Well, Mohammed, you did posit that the reason Iran was not wiping out these countries for their participation in the aggression against Iran, the reason they weren't doing that is because they were hoping to change behaviors, influence behaviors, have them recalculate. And we
Of
did
course,
see
that Iran did. For example, Iran focused on making sure Oman did not go in that direction. Iran punished Qatar, hit it very hard, and when Qatar shifted, Iran changed its policy towards Qatar. We will demand reparations after this war,
well,
and they will
speaking
have
of
to
that,
pay.
I don't know if you've
But
heard, Qatar has yesterday, now sending receipts to the United Nations for damages done by Iran. I found that really.
well, they can do whatever they want, but ultimately we will make sure that those dead kids in Minab, that their families are compensated for the dirty work that the Qatari regime done. I mean, the despot in Qatar is no better than the despot in the UAE. He's just played a more sophisticated role by funding media outlets. And I'm not saying all the people in these media outlets are bad people. I have friends in them, actually. And I have decent people who are decent people in some, but they have a media empire. It's not just Al Jazeera. They have a media empire. They have mosques all in Beirut. They fund many mosques. I actually once went to this very elaborate religious center in Beirut. I won't say exactly where, but it's anyway. If I say it, it's not a big city. So, but it's a known landmark. And I met the people, the senior people there. And when we, and even though they live, again, I have to be careful. They don't live that far away from southern Beirut. Their ignorance about Hezbollah and about even their religious beliefs was unbelievable, because he was saying, this religious figure, the scholar, he was saying things about Shia that were just nonsense, and I, a layman, was saying, well, that's not true. This is, and he was just, he was just utterly ignorant. But the point is that these people are appointed to promote a particular narrative. So whether it's in the media, and so Qatar has been more sophisticated. They pretended to be pro-Palestinian, but the Mossad, the head of Mossad, travels there. The head of Israeli military intelligence. I mean, people, if they put their heads in the sand, fine, you can believe that. A lot of people get funding from Qatar. A lot of people, have received scholarships. I understand why they, or from Erdogan, I understand why one could have that feeling. But, at the end of the day, if your eyes are open to reality, what happened in Syria was to the benefit of the Israeli regime. What Qatar does not help Gaza.
No.
What the Emirates does not help Palestine either. None of them are. What Erdogan does not help Palestine. All of them are enabling the enemy. But some people, because they're they're Arabs or they're Turks or they're Sunnis or they're whatever, they're from this community or that community. I mean, if Iran was working against the Palestinian people, if it was collaborating with the empire, I would turn against it. That's just how I see it. Right now, I've always said that if I did not have the opportunity to stand in Iran and support the Islamic Republic of Iran in the axis of resistance, and for some reason I could not live in this region, hypothetically, I would go to Cuba. I would go to Venezuela. As a Muslim, I would go there and I would help them. Doesn't matter. That the point is that they are standing up against an empire, and whoever is with the empire is on the side of evil, and whoever is opposing the empire is definitely better than the empire itself, unless there's some very rare extreme cases which I can't think of right now.
Just worth noting that Qatar.
Oh, sorry. One thing I wanted to say. It's not related, but I wanted to say this earlier. And this is something that I have said a couple of times, but since I hear this a lot whenever I speak about Syria, they say, well, Iran supported the United States in Iraq and Afghanistan. Which, in the case of Iraq, that's absolute nonsense. Iran was the only country that opposed the U.S. war in Iraq. Iran was open about it, even though Saddam invaded our country. U.S. troops were based in all these countries that were promoting this anti-Iranian propaganda. They were in the Arabian Peninsula, and through Turkey, NATO, and from the south, they were working against Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein sent his planes to Iran. He sent a lot of Iraqi equipment to Iran because even though he hated the Islamic Republic of Iran, out of all these countries, this was the country that he felt was more just to the Iraqi people, or for whatever reason. Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, the martyr, he spoke against the war, and people in Iraq, some people in Iraq, including Shia, were angry with him for being opposed to war. Anyone who goes back and looks at history would know the truth. these fake narratives. I was a part of the anti-war coalition in the UK. I was a PhD student there at the time. I was in the protests against the war in Afghanistan. In the case of Afghanistan, the Iranians back then, they thought that Al Qaeda and these genocidal maniacs that in Afghanistan, and the Taliban back then was different from the Taliban now. They were genocidal back then. The Taliban, the people who are in charge now, we have major differences. They don't allow girls to go to school. That, and we give scholarships to a lot of girls from Afghanistan and Iran at my university, other universities, and they have education here in Iran. But in any case, we don't agree with their policies. But the Taliban today is not the Taliban of back then. So when 9/11 happened, Iran, and this is my interpretation, Iranian officials thought that the United States had learned a lesson, that they had created a monster, and that they now had to deal with it. But even then, Iran was sending it in its own people into Afghanistan to undermine the American position. So the Iranians showed sympathy to the American people. They did cooperate in showing telling them the hideouts of Al Qaeda. That Al Qaeda was just these people who carried out this attack. Later on, Iran began to feel that this was not just Al Qaeda; it was something much deeper. And then the Iranians, from the very beginning, when the Americans occupied the country, they started working against the United States from the very beginning. And
General Qasem Soleimani, you had written once, had started to make these inroads and build trusting relationships.
Yes.
Yeah.
He was the person who helped the resistance in Afghanistan grow and the new Taliban emerge, which was much more, which was different from the old Taliban. And that new Taliban when he was murdered by the Americans, a huge delegation came from Afghanistan to express their condolences. They went to his house from the Taliban. Again, when it comes to girls and all that, but in any case, at the beginning, these were really, really extreme people, and they thought that, this was just this organization that had carried out mass murder. So they helped them target the terrorists, but they also brought in their own people, and they began supporting the Taliban, but a new version of the Taliban began to emerge.
Engagement.
In Iraq, Iran, but in the case of Iraq, it was clear as day that Iraq had done nothing to the United States. That the Iraqis had not carried out aggression against the American people, and that they were lying about chemical weapons. So when Iran knew that this was a lie, even though it's Saddam Hussein, Iran hated Saddam Hussein far more than it hated the old Al-Qaeda and Taliban in Afghanistan. Saddam Hussein had killed a couple of 100,000 Iranians. I was injured in that war. I survived that war with wounds and my friends murdered. We didn't have that sort of thing with Al-Qaeda or the Taliban. But even though our hatred for Saddam Hussein was much greater, and the majority of Iraq was Shia, Iran was opposed to the war. And these other countries supported the war. So to say that, well, this is double standards by Iran is absolute nonsense. Iran at no point, whether in Afghanistan or in Iraq or elsewhere, did it apply double standards. Or, for example, sometimes they say, well, why didn't they help Chechnya? The people in Chechnya were takfiris. They were not, they were not fighting for the rights of the people. They were a part of a proxy. They were proxy force working for the CIA and with the support of regimes in the Persian Gulf against Russia. This was to undermine Russia. This was not some group of people who were being destroyed and that they were just victims and they were ordinary people. when that did happen, who supported Bosnia? When ordinary Bosnians were being massacred, the only country, they're Sunni, they're not Shia, they're not Shia today. The only country that went to save the Bosnian people was Iran. So Iran has not been sectarian. Iran has supported communist countries, Cuba. It supports Christian countries, socialists like Venezuela, which is in a very difficult situation right now. It
Armenia.
Well, no, that is even yes. That you can say to a
Sure.
degree that they would. Well, if Iran is sectarian, then it would support Azerbaijan. I mean,
Which is Shia.
Iranians believe, but most Iranians believe that the Republic of Azerbaijan belongs to Iran. That's what ordinary Iranians would say, and ordinary Azeris would say the same thing. The gravitational pull towards Iran is much greater than the other way around. I mean, this is something that the West likes to pretend it's the opposite. But Khamenei means from Khamenei. Khamenei is an Azeri city. Marandi means from Marand. Marand is an Azeri city. Pezeshkian is Azeri. To think that there's some distinction between Azeris and non-Azeris in Iran is just, it's just living in a fantasy world. But the point is that Iran supported Azerbaijan with regards to its occupied territory. But it supported Armenia when Azerbaijan began to turn the tables and start to threaten Armenian territory. In other words, Iran and they accuse Iran of all sorts of things. In fact, Iran, when Armenia unjustly occupied huge swathes of Azerbaijan that had nothing to do with Karabakh, by the way, Iran began training Azeri forces. The Americans told the Aliyev to expel them. I published footage of this a few years ago of their training. So when the territory of the Republic of Azerbaijan was occupied, Iran did not accept that. Iran even helped train them. Then they were expelled. When the Azerbaijan government, with the support of Israel and Erdogan, threatened Armenian territory, Iran said, "We won't stand for that either." So Iran is accused of many things, but I do not know of a single instance where the Iranians knowingly pursued what could be called double standards.
You're right. I think a lot of people are noticing that, and that we hear a lot from Americans even who are surprised at the morality they're seeing from Iran in waging the war and handling itself compared to their own president, who's talked
just
about.
look at the number of civilians who've been murdered in Iran, and compare them to the other side of the Persian Gulf. Could Iran fire those missiles at places where missiles are being fired at us? Of course they can. Of course they can, but Iran won't do that. But every day we're just a 10-minute walk from here. A 10-minute walk from here, they bombed a building. They bombed a building. I don't want to say exactly where I am, but they bombed a building of just civilians. And then a 15-minute walk from here is another place where people had gathered on the street. No, well, not a 15, like a 15-minute walk from another place where I did interviews, but maybe 25 minutes walk from where I am now. They bombed a square where people had gathered at night, because across Tehran they have all these gatherings, and they bombed it, and a woman was killed just like 8-9 days ago, I guess.
Yeah.
So we don't do that. The Iranians don't do that. Or for example, when
I mean, you've heard the criticism. Y'all should do more of that. That is what the criticism is, if anything. I want to bring something up because, when we talk about geopolitics, the image most often associated with geopolitics is the chessboard, right? Which is strategy. It's a strategic game, and you don't move quickly when implementing a strategy. you stick to your guns, you stick to the strategy, otherwise you have a chance of losing, by having emotional responses. So of course there is, and you've heard this, after the June war, Iranians on the streets who had rallied in numbers unseen, I think, in recent years, behind their government, behind their flag, behind their military, were so angry, many of them, that there was this unofficial ceasefire declared after 12 days. They wanted to go all the way. I imagine some of that sentiment still exists now. But what I really want to talk to you about is
more so now. People today are even more united than they were back then. Today, it's even though those that segment of society that went to the streets with the rioters, mostly teenagers and first or second year undergraduates. Even they have changed. I'm not saying everyone has.
Yeah.
No one believes these fake Western narratives anymore. People have woken up. It's the last 40 days has been a university education for everyone. As I said, it's because Iran played it correctly.
Yeah.
Iran exposed the West. If the Iranians had not negotiated, then these people, if you had come and said to me, well, if you had negotiated, this wouldn't have happened, what would be your counter argument? So these young people saw that these Persian language media outlets are lying, that Iran did try, that Iran went the extra mile or the extra kilometer. Yeah. And yet, despite all that, it got them nowhere. So, what the Iranians did, again, emotionally, it's sometimes hurtful. I mean, last night on the streets of Tehran, people were very angry that Iran was not striking because of Lebanon. Very angry. But, and I'm more emotionally attached than most because I lived in Lebanon. I went there for my sabbatical. I think probably, anyway, I went there for my sabbatical. I traveled to Lebanon a lot. I was there when Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah was martyred. I was there for his funeral ceremony. But I understand that when we want to defeat a very powerful enemy, we have to be very sophisticated.
To the point about the geopolitical chessboard, two other countries that get criticized a lot for not acting, and we saw this just in two UN Security Council resolutions just a few weeks apart. The Russians and Chinese, both strategic partners with Iran in different ways, and fellow members of the SCO and the BRICS Plus organizations, and on the receiving end of either Western and U.S. economic sanctions or punishments. These two countries abstained on a resolution, and supporters of Iran or critics of Israel, the new gang on the scene, right, were outraged. How dare you abstain? We tried to explain what some of the reasons could be. And then on a watered down resolution just this week, the criticizing or asking Iran to open the Strait of Hormuz that was sponsored by Bahrain. And it was watered down specifically so that the Chinese and Russians would abstain. They both vetoed it. You and I know from the Syrian war and our experience there, when these two countries started to act more closely together on international issues, that you only really need one veto. And often we saw that happening. And people would criticize the country that didn't veto. This came just hours before Trump's, imposed deadline on Tuesday. And I think it sent a strong message. A veto was necessary because I wonder if Trump is afraid of anyone in this world other than, I believe, Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping. Not fear, but, will at least not treat them as his peons. What do you make of the Chinese and Russian role in this war? Is it enough? Is it calculating? Is it what Iran needs and all Iran needs? Because, we all know that Iran turned down a mutual defense pact with the Russians, which one of our Russian guests told us could have provided a nuclear umbrella for Iran, et cetera, et cetera. What do you feel about the Russian and Chinese role in this war? Could they do more, or is it best they don't until a pivotal moment?
No, that path was. I mean, that is also something that is misunderstood, and how it evolved. That's also something that's misunderstood. But that goes to the past, and I don't think it's necessary to go there. But a lot of things that people hear and believe are not very much grounded in reality. But Iran's relationship with Russia is very good, and the countries cooperate closely. And Iran's relationship with China is also very good. It is catching up to its relationship with Russia for a number of reasons. It evolves more slowly. Part of it was because under President Rouhani, Iran did not pursue a very appropriate policy towards China, and the Chinese felt it. And then later on, Dr. Larijani, who was martyred recently, when he was the Speaker of Parliament, he went to China and corrected that, and the relationship since then has been improving rapidly. But also, I would say, and I'm not saying that this is specific to Russia or China, in general, people underestimated Iran. Even though people like myself were saying that there's a very old clip of me when I was young, maybe more than a decade old, on Press TV, where I said that if they wage war on Iran, all these countries in the Persian Gulf will be destroyed. And why? Because they'll be complicit. And that went viral back then. I haven't seen it for years, but the thing is, I've been saying that for years, and I'm not like this lone person on the planet that's been thinking that way. I live in Iran. I know I understand the country to a degree and what the thinking is. It's not like I wasn't some brilliant person predicting the future. My assessment was based on what I was seeing. I'm not even an expert. I teach literature and Orientalism, but that's what I was seeing. But outside of Iran, because they are influenced by Western propaganda, by propaganda from these Arab regimes, they have a very different understanding of Iran. And even non-Western countries, because they learn a lot about Iran from the West, they understand Iran through Western eyes, which is, of course, a terrible thing to do, but it's the reality. So a lot of people believed that Iran would collapse. When the 12-Day War happened, a lot of people thought Iran would collapse. For me, it was, and for many people, for all my friends, it was ridiculous. No one even contemplated for a moment that Iran would collapse. But I don't want to go into detail, but many people who are not Iranian felt that Iran would collapse very swiftly. And then they were surprised. But apparently it didn't change them enough, because when the Americans came in, they thought, well, now it will collapse. For me, it was clear as day that it wouldn't collapse. I remember with Pierce Morgan saying, this and this will happen. He said, you're a bunch of hot air. Okay, well, it's fine. But ultimately, that's what happened. What I said turned out to be correct. And the reason is that people like myself and many others who don't happen to be speaking in English or in the foreign media, they know better. And so, but now I think that what this war has done, is that it has made the Islamic Republic of Iran and the Axis of Resistance very popular across the world. But it has also shown countries across the world that Iran is much more powerful, and the society is much more united than they had imagined. Even though we were telling them that this would happen and that this is the case, they really couldn't believe it, because the Western narrative is so powerful, which is reinforced, as I said, by these regional despots and proxies. But now, I don't want to go into detail, but important people, important as in people who have a position of influence outside of Iran, non-Iranians, have told me over the past few weeks in their messages and in our conversations that we view Iran very differently today than we did in the past.
A big change there. I, it's quite amazing that although Iran decided to restrict passageway in the Strait of Hormuz, most people were blaming Trump for that. And now that the strait has been restricted, or movement in the strait has been restricted again as a result of Israel's bombardment of Lebanon, most people in the world are blaming Israel and Benjamin Netanyahu for that. So that's a lot changed. Mohammed, before we leave, any predictions about negotiations in the next 2 weeks?
I'm not good at predictions, and I don't think it helps that much. What is important is that Iran is not going to capitulate.
Yeah.
And Iran is in a stronger position than Trump. And if Trump carries out a land attack, which is quite possible, he may take a couple of islands or a territory, and then for a few days, CNN and Fox News will be showing footage of all their magnificent successes and all those explosions, killing all these Iranians, and all of them will be armchair generals, and they'll be delighted to see slaughtered Iranians, because at the end of the day, they're all the same, the Western media. Whether it's The Guardian or Breitbart, they're all the same. Anyone who thinks otherwise is utterly naive. But utterly naive. But they'll fail, just like they failed in this war. And just like most of those explosions that you've seen on television, they turned out to be decoys. Iran has, put in, if I don't know, maybe hundreds of thousands of decoys, if not at least tens of thousands of air defense systems, and they're really good. I mean, I think a lot of them are Chinese, some of them are Iranian, but the Chinese ones they give off heat.
War is not funny, but Iran has managed to inject a level of humor in this war that is a propaganda bonanza for a country that's been awful at it for decades.
Well, the reason is that a lot of young people are doing this on their own, and they're creative and they're smart. And as I said, the world has changed. You said that I used to be you said a one-man show or something at the beginning of the program, or just a lone voice. Now there are thousands of people who are speaking out, and they do far better than I. They're much more eloquent, and they use art, and they use AI, and they use new technologies. They're fantastic, and I think that this is irreversible. The Americans have the regime in Washington, the Netanyahu regime has inadvertently created an awakening, and this awakening includes hosts of thousands upon thousands upon thousands of young men and women, and they're much more effective than people like myself. And the Iranians are an extraordinary people, like the resistance in Lebanon and Yemen. They're very steadfast, girls and boys. When the Americans and the Israelis bombed their protests in Tehran, I was at one. These teenage girls and boys, they didn't stampede, they didn't run away, they all stood their ground. I've never seen such a thing. And there was this one young woman who was actually speaking to her cell phone in English, a PhD student at the University of Tehran, in fact. And she was speaking about why people chant Allahu Akbar, and why they're not afraid. And then the right behind her, as if it was coordinated, the missile struck the crowd, the rally. It was the Quds Day, and no one stampeded, and they started chanting Allahu Akbar, and she was amazed that this had happened. You would think that in the West they would invite her on the news channels, that but they would never do that, because they are saying that they want to emancipate Iranian women, where in fact it's these women, these Iranian women, these young girls and teenagers and young women on the streets of across the country in Iran, who are steadfast and resilient and brave, and who refuse to budge, and who won't run away, and who won't even scream. They are the ones who need to liberate these regime-affiliated feminists in the West who want to save the brown women from the brown men. But just one final thing before I go, and that is that, and I've said this on a number of other programs in recent days, because I think it's useful. There's a good book that I think people should read called "Going to Tehran." This was written by Flint and Hillary Leverett, who worked in the White House, who worked under Condoleezza Rice of all people, and of course Flint Leverett resigned, of course, over the Iraq War. So they're two very principled people, one Jewish, one Catholic. So they're not Iranian or anything like that. They were in the White House, so they were in the machine, but very decent people. And when they came out, they started thinking about Iran, and their views evolved, and they wrote a very, very good book. I don't agree with 100% of it necessarily. I mean, I agree with almost all of it, but not necessarily everything in the book. But it's a somewhat older book. But if analysts had read this book, American and European analysts had read this book, and instead of attacking them, which everyone did, all the think tankers and the Democrats and the Republicans, those affiliated to the two sides of the same Epstein class, they just had hammered these two people and slandered them. But if they had listened to them, if they had read the book and taken it seriously, we wouldn't be where we are today, and the global economy would be in a much better situation, and we would be living in a much better world. But instead, they listened to the Zionists, and the Zionists don't care about the world. They don't care about the suffering of the Indians because of high energy prices. They don't care if there's a global depression. There's Israeli firsters. They're Zionists. They're ethno-supremacists. But I think Going to Tehran is a good book, and I advise people to read it because I think it deals with a lot of the myths about Iran, but also I think it just shows what the Americans could have done. They could have gone to Tehran and pursued a different course, but instead they tried to go to Tehran through military means.
Thank you for that recommendation, because I'm telling you, people are crawling out of the woodwork. People I know have known for decades who never cared a whit about politics, who are obsessed about this war and are thrilled that Iran is taking the stand. I mean, it's the right time and the right place, it seems, for this confrontation, which will change the world forever. Brave, resilient Iranian people, that's all I can say. I know there are a lot of twists and turns ahead because of what the adversary is and who they are.
We're not near the end, and there will be many days where the enemy will try to create division. Well, they'll try to undermine the resistance. Well, they'll try to split people. But I'm confident, very confident, that the resistance will persevere.
Yeah, I mean, the enemy is also tired and broke, and what we see on the streets of Iran every night shows us that the Iranians are not that way. Professor Mohammad Marandi, Professor of English Literature and Orientalism at the University of Tehran, thank you for coming on The Cradle again and being a friend of The Cradle. We hope to see you again soon. Please stay safe.
Thank you very much. Always a pleasure.